Welcome to Ideas Live. I'm Anne-Marie Oomen, and this is my co-host,
Karen Anderson.
And this is the show where we have a deep conversation about issues. This year, we focused on ways to help. And we've explored so many different topics and areas of public service. We've had nonprofit representatives here. But what we recently realized was that most of the people we've interviewed have been associated with an organization or an institution. So they had a framework from which they were creating their ways to help. And we realized that we hadn't really focused on individuals and the ways in which an individual might create change in this world. We all think we do, we all hope we do our volunteer work, but sometimes one of those people comes to the surface as an initiator. And that was certainly the case with my learning about Miriam Pico's effort for Puerto Rico. And so I wanted to go into that idea of what does it look like when it's one individual who's obviously an extrovert in the community, but also sees a need and then establishes as an individual a way to make change.
I think many of us feel that as an individual, there's not much we can do.
Right.
And
or we feel like it's so small that it's not making a difference.
And it's fascinating to me because I tend to be more of an introvert. And I've never thought of myself as a political person in any way. I care passionately, but to take on a project like that by myself in the hopes of generating support, it seems daunting. And so I'm really curious as to what might make that work.
And then how the ripple effect happens. I mean, this is how things begin. And we forget, I think, that, one person's initiative is maybe a drop in the bucket, but the bucket ripples. And I am very curious about how that operates, how that works. And so we have a person to tell her story today. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Ideas Live. I'm Anne-Marie Oomen. This is my co-host,
Karen Anderson.
And with us today to talk about that whole idea of what makes change is Miriam Pico. I'm so pleased to have you here.
Thank you.
Miriam is the creator of Mindful and Musical. She works with children and also sometimes with grown-ups, and it's yoga and a mix of supportive elements. And we have her here today to answer and discuss that question of how individuals might make a change. And by its nature, this is going to be a more intimate and personal interview, which I'm so happy about. And I think I'd like to start with just asking you to talk a little bit about your home place, which is Puerto Rico, and the story of how you came from Puerto Rico to your country, but to the mainland.
To the mainland, right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on and for
you're welcome.
Having interest in this. I'm so passionate about it, so thank you. Yeah. So I was born in Ay Bonito, Puerto Rico, which is way up high on a mountain, kind of in the center of the island. And it's a really, really beautiful place. Ay Bonito actually means, oh, how beautiful, because that's literally what you say when you are standing up there looking around. And it's really, really pretty. My mom had me with a midwife. The midwife's name is Miriam, and I was named after her because she's a really awesome lady, and my mom wanted to give me that strong name. So
that's beautiful.
It was, yeah. I actually years later, actually just a few years ago, I went to the island and I had found her on Facebook. Her name's Miriam Godshell. Hello, Miriam, if you ever see this. And it was amazing to get to meet her. She showed me around the whole hospital. She showed me the room I was born in. We just had a great experience together.
So you've kept connection with family and people?
Oh yes, I have a lot of family on the island still, and we're very close. It's one of those things, years can go by, and as soon as we're together, it's just laughter and love, and just this vibe is so strong with them.
Yeah. So you have deep connections with the island, and then I want to touch on, but you came here, you're living here, you're growing up here, and then you have this kind of interesting moment where your mother takes you to Mexico. Can you talk a little bit about that moment as a transformative moment? Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, we came to the mainland. I only spoke Spanish. We all only spoke Spanish. My mother had learned English in school, but it was still kind of she was nervous to speak it. But once she was here, you know, she dove right in, got jobs, got work, and we all learned English. Thrown into the deep end, as they say. That's how we learned. So years passed. Now I'm 12 years old, and my mom had always had this dream of taking all 4 of us kids on a mission trip, and not the sort of like pass out Bibles mission trip, but like a service mission trip. And she was a single mother, keep in mind. So all 4 of us, and I was 12, I was the baby. I am the baby. We went to Oaxaca, and that's very, very, very southern. Have you been to Oaxaca? I know you have.
No,
not. Oh, it's so
just to
beautiful.
Guatemala, yeah.
It's so beautiful, so colorful, and the people are just amazing. But we went with Mary Null missionaries and stayed in this house that it was no electricity. You took a shower outside when it rained, very bare bones. No screens on the windows. We dealt with scorpions. We dealt with snakes. Like everything. It was very adventurous, and I was really moved. I think just being thrown into that environment and meeting so many people that were in really great need was eye-opening enough. And I always am like, I think every teenager should have this experience before they graduate and go off into the world. You need the big wake-up call about the majority of the world.
Yeah.
So because we have Spanish background, we were all split up. My mom and all 4 siblings, we were all split up with other people who did not speak Spanish, just strangers that we had met who were also volunteering. And so me at 12 years old, I was the interpreter for these people. And I'd been in Michigan then so long that I was a little bit afraid to speak Spanish. I wasn't that confident anymore. Yeah. And so I could understand it perfectly, but speaking, you know, it took me outside of my comfort zone. But we helped a lot of people. There was like a boy.
What were you actually doing?
Yeah, we would take buses every day and say goodbye to everyone and go off to our spots. And there was like, for example, one place had a boy with cerebral palsy, and we would help literally feed him. We would help play with the younger siblings who maybe felt more neglected because he had so many needs. Another time we would go to a nursing home, and these nursing homes, it wasn't just the elderly, it was mostly elderly, but there was also like an orphan was living there, and a little girl who was recovering from a surgery was now living there. So it was so eye-opening. We helped all sorts of people, and it was great.
Yeah. So that was a moment you cite as a kind of formative moment for your consciousness, your actual identity, and I love that. Then you become a singer, and besides your work with mindful and musical, you become a singer, and you have all of this kind of public presence. And I've heard you sing many times. It's so beautiful.
Thank you.
And so you have this larger public connection. Right. So those things, I bring those up because those things are now in place. But then your beloved home island gets hit by, in like a 1-month span, Hurricane Irma and then Hurricane Maria in 2017.
Right.
And you wake up and you are worried about your family. Tell us what happens then.
Well, I was actually teaching. I had to go teach at Mindful and Musical after waking up to the news that this was the worst natural disaster in recorded history. I mean, it was really, really, really bad. And I wasn't hearing from any of my family. I was really worried, but I went and I was teaching, and you know, when you're with kids, you can't be too worried. They snap you out of it. So had a great class, and then as soon as the class was over, I went right back to my phone and I was trying to contact people, trying to check if they had updated their social media or anything. And there was just nothing and nothing and nothing. Days were passing, and I was checking in with people here on the mainland. Have you heard from anyone? And they just didn't. So for me, this was like a personal disaster. It wasn't some far off, oh, how should we help these poor strangers? It was my family. And that's one of the main things, is maybe you don't know how you would react in a certain situation, or if you could be an individual instigator, but when it hits so close to home, you don't think, you just act. So it was very hard. I mean, I cried just thinking the worst had happened.
Yeah, and you finally do reach an aunt, I think?
Yes, my aunt, Thelma, Titi Telmin.
And she says, I think this is kind of fascinating. The thing that she says they need most right now are
the big batteries, the biggest batteries. I think
C batteries.
C batteries. Yeah, it's been 2 years now. I used to say it all the time back then, asking people for these batteries. She needed the batteries, yes, to run fans because there was no air conditioning, and you think it's 100 degrees. Even at night, you're sleeping. You need air conditioning and that. So yes, batteries, and there was also, she was telling me about her nephew, who's my cousin Megan. He's a priest, and all the people from the parish were just asking for help because they didn't have basics. There was no running water. There was no clean drinking water. We heard people were drinking water out of rivers, out of waterfalls, and so I was thinking, okay, purification tablets, the iodine pills, like all these things. I was thinking ways we can help, but it started with my aunt saying, I mean, if it's okay, I could use some, she didn't want to ask, but I was like, please, what can we do?
So that led to a kind of roller coaster here in the community. You used your platform as a singer to let people know, am I correct? And what happened from that? Your friends Jamie and Morgan got involved?
Yes, it started with, I set up a bin at my classes and said, hey, if you're coming to class, I heard that there's a need for diapers, I heard there's a need for batteries, if you just want to bring it with you. It started with that, and then Chris Selby, who owns Evola Piano, he was like, I'll set up a bin here too. And it just, snowball is the way that I think of it. It snowballed into this huge thing where everyone wanted to help. And Jamie and Morgan, they were amazing. Oh, go ahead.
And just to let our viewers know, Jamie is Jamie Kramer,
Jamie Kramer
of WKL. Is it?
I'm not sure where she is right now.
And then Morgan Burke Myers.
Yep, okay. Burke Myers. So they were helping me because I was getting all of these supplies, and they were helping me to maybe get it out of the bins, put it into the shelves, and we were already having this discussion because she had this huge heart for the Virgin Islands. She had a connection there, and that had also been really wiped out, honestly, parts of it. So we were on the phone and just like both of us crying and consoling each other and feeling helpless. Here we are in Michigan, and we wish we could do something. And that led to us going on the radio, asking for the supplies, asking if anyone had. We didn't want financial donations because we're not a nonprofit. We're not anything income tax time. We didn't want to have a bunch of hassle. So plus I also have this, maybe from experience or I don't know, but I just have this distrust of, is the government down there really going to get them the money? Is FEMA really going to this? And all these nonprofits, I was like, I don't know them. So I just wanted to get the supplies to them instead of sending money to strangers and hoping it gets to the right place.
Here's the deal. How do you safely get all of this stuff, these piles and truckloads there, and then to the people who need them? The logistics. How did you know how to do that?
Oh, I just asked.
You learned as you went?
Everything was learn as you go. I asked my aunt, it started with my aunt down there, and I said, well, I can get you those batteries. What else do you need? She needed some tanks to hold gas. She did have a generator, so but all the stores were just empty. People had bought all these supplies.
The store's down there.
The store's down there.
So, okay.
Right. So I said, okay, I'll send you batteries. I'll send you these empty gas tanks. And basically, I said, if I can get supplies to you, can you get them to my cousin who's the priest, and then he can distribute them to the people? And she's like, sure. So we were sending all these things in big boxes. I mean, my whole house just turned into a big
distribution center.
Distribution center for this. Like, my living room was unwalkable for a good week because there was boxes, and we were filling them, and then more boxes. So we would send them to her. She would put them in her car, get them to the cousin. He would pass them. That's how it started. And ultimately, once one of the boxes went missing, it never arrived to her. And I saw the receipt. It said it had arrived. It had not. And it had been full of, pretty expensive stuff. So that's where I kind of had the wake-up call of like, okay, this isn't sustainable. If we're going to keep sending things, we need a better operation.
So the first thing that happened was the Friends of Puerto Rico?
Well, first thing that happened with that, when we had all of this, when we had like the open space collection and people
oh my gosh, yes. There are beautiful pictures of that here.
People brought wheelbarrows full of stuff. It was like so much. It was amazing. But I was thinking, okay, we don't have the money to ship all of this. How are we going to get it down there? So I threw out on social media, because something about this very passionate state that I was in, I was very bold. On Facebook, I said, we need a plane and we need somebody to get supplies to Puerto Rico. And I didn't think anyone was going to do anything about that. But somebody that I had met, she said, well, I have a connection with Friends of Puerto Rico, and they are going to be sending a plane full of things down to Puerto Rico. Do you want to try to get your supplies on there? And I was like, sure. So Morgan actually drove the truck, the huge moving truck that was filled all the way to the brim. Here's little Harper inside of the truck. You can see it goes all the way up. The whole thing was totally full, so thank you, Traverse City. But Morgan just took it upon himself to drive that truck to Maryland, where it was then going to get on the plane.
On the plane to Puerto Rico.
And I felt like with a real connection, and she knew the director, and I felt that I could trust that they would get into the right hands. And I actually was able to watch their Facebook Live from inside the plane as they were, all right, we're hovering over, where did they go? Aguadilla, I think, and we're going to be dropping it off, and it's going to go to this place and this place. They were naming the towns over there, and I started crying. I thought, oh my gosh, it's really all these, right from our hands, right to the people in need. It was amazing. But such a team effort. I could not have done any of that by myself. I could go to the radio stations, I could ask for the help, but Traverse City.
It makes me think that maybe there is kind of a pent-up yearning to help inside all of us.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
So once an opportunity presents itself, and then a way to do it. I mean, ways to help is what we've been discussing now for a year, and that people want to help, often don't know how to help. But I just want to also add, speaking personally, is that when this tragedy hit Puerto Rico, it was not only learning about the scope of the disaster, but it was learning about Puerto Rico. And I hate to say, but I suspect I'm not alone, that I was fairly ignorant about Puerto Rico, both as its status in relation to our country, and a great deal else about it. And in an awful way, I think a great many of us were educated about Puerto Rico, and as a place, not just as a disaster.
Absolutely.
And that part was positive. But I felt like all of a sudden I felt a connection to Puerto Rico that I hadn't had before. And I think, where has it been all this time? Why don't we hear more about Puerto Rico? It's unfortunate that storms had to bring it to our attention, but it was, that'll never go away. I think Puerto Rico has become part of our consciousness in a whole different way, not just the negative side, but the positive recovery and where do we go from here part.
And that
Absolutely,
it
that's
is
a great point.
it is part of the country, and therefore it's our obligation and,
For sure.
and our pleasure to make that connection and that interaction. Yeah, I think you're so right
That's
about
a great
that.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had mentioned back then, I said, wow, I've been here all these years trying to tell people how great Puerto Rico is, and now all of a sudden they're listening. You know, and it's sad that that's how it happened and that's why, but really it was a big catalyst, and I was super, if that's a positive thing that comes out of it, is that more tourism to the island and more interest and more people
care about it. Yeah.
you care, and more people looking out for them when it comes time to vote, because even though they are part of the U.S., even though they can die in our wars, even though they are U.S. citizens, they cannot vote for the president, and they don't. It's a second-class citizenship.
Do you think Puerto Rico should become another state? I mean, would that be something you would want?
That's the million, billion, trillion dollar question. As far as, okay, so here's real talk. When I was down there talking to my family, I said, what do you guys think? Do you want to be a state? Do you not? Blah, blah. And they were torn as well in terms of, you know, maybe that would have helped us get more FEMA support or more, you know, infrastructure, all this stuff. And I was the one that said, because I was just processing all of this for myself, and I said, well, but what about Flint? Flint is in Michigan. Michigan's a state, and still things like this happen, and still there's this inequality, and the people that don't have the funds are not being looked after. And so now here's Puerto Rico, and many people don't have the funds. Thankfully, my family is pretty well. They're doing great, but many of the citizens on the island are not. And so are they just going to be ignored, but they're a state, and so what does that mean?
So it's not a solution necessarily.
I don't know what the solution would be. It is a mess, and just politically, it's so complicated.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, and people that I respect, a lot of them down there are like, well, we just want to be like the Dominican Republic or somewhere that has a friendly relationship with the U.S., that we're allies, and you know they're going to look out for us, we'll look out for them, but we are our own independent. Yes, we make our own rules.
I didn't mean to derail this conversation, but it's
a very important piece of the puzzle.
I think it's become more of a conversation because of all that has happened there.
Absolutely.
And that's probably, that part's a good thing.
But the answer is,
we don't know.
I don't know. And I think it starts at the very, very root of the problem is people have to first care about Puerto Rico, and I think we're seeing that happen.
Finally,
and so hopefully then things will start coming into place.
Well, speaking of it, then you decided to go home, to make that first trip back to Puerto Rico with, if I remember correctly, Jamie and Morgan
Yes.
again. Yes, and that in that trip, you took, instead of taking the supplies yourself, you did take some supplies. I believe this is when you took the insulin?
I think we took insulin on 2 trips with my kids and with Jamie and Morgan. Yep, there's the medicine. Ryan Dobry, she's amazing. She donated us all of this insulin, all these syringes, anything that anyone that's diabetic might need. Specifically because we had heard that people were dying on the island of Vieques because they didn't get their insulin in time, and the hospital had been destroyed, and it was just a mess. And so, again, social media, as soon as I said anything about that, Ryan Dobry, bing, called me and let me know I have things. So we just wanted to take these down there, and then also people had been giving us funds, and we just wanted to spend them on the island so that we wanted to buy the supplies, the diapers, the food, all of the iodine pills, anything that we could buy, we wanted to buy it from there to kind of help their economy, and also so things don't get lost in the mail.
Yes.
And so postage, I mean, we were spending money on postage like crazy for these big heavy boxes, and we thought, all right, forget it, let's just go there. And literally we filled up the back of the car and would drop it off to places. We had experiences though, even where like we would meet a random person and they'd say, oh, why are you here? Are you from a church? Are you from an NGO, or you know? And we'd always be like, nope, we just care, we're just here to help. And they would just start crying, and we'd find out, we'd be like, well, what do you need, you know? And this woman showed us like her baby had a rash all over her skin because they had been using water from somewhere that wasn't clean to bathe because there was no running water. And I was like, oh my gosh. So we were able to hook her up with iodine pills and with food for the baby, and there was even like some extra money we just gave her, like
to do that. Yeah. Wow. So you go with Jamie and Morgan, and you said at that point you connected, if I remember correctly, with the military or with a veteran who took you up into the mountains, and you were just taking supplies to individual villages.
Right, so we went to this school in Corozal that was during the relief effort. The school, so like the children were still learning on one side of the building, and then the whole back side of the building was turned into a disaster relief center. And so there was all these supplies, everything was being organized, and it was all volunteers. And they were helping, like the military was there with these buses, and we would pile into the bus with these military guys that were from the island, and they were so awesome. We had music cranked, and we were laughing. Everybody's having a great time as we're winding up these mountain roads. And so then we'd stop at some neighborhood that was really in need and start just in 100-degree heat. We're carrying these big, heavy things. I mean, I was sweating so much. We were all sweating so much, and we were just feeling so alive and feeling like, here we are. Like, we're really here. It's right here. We're not just writing a check and hoping the best, and like, you don't have that same feeling. It was really incredible. So we were able to do that. And then at the same place, we found that there was this veteran. His name was Jason Maddie, and he had this little team of veterans, U.S. Army veterans, that were just now concerned citizens, and they had helped out after Hurricane Harvey in Texas, and then they'd helped out in Florida after, I think maybe the same hurricane. I think, right, Harvey?
Yeah.
And then
Maria was the big one. Yeah.
Yeah, but before Maria,
that's right. Yeah. Okay. Got
and
it.
before Irma, so H-I-M. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. There you go.
They had helped out there, and then when it was one of those things, there's some people that are just really drawn to when a disaster hits, and they just want to help. So these people had gone to Puerto Rico, and we were invited to like jump into their Jeep and help. And they would go on these rescue missions. And Jamie and Morgan were there. So Morgan had a camera, like a real camera. And so he was documenting these missions. And we were able to see there was a man that had lived in a cave, and he had survived the hurricane living in this cave, and he didn't have, running water or anything. And when Jason found him, it turned out he needed medical attention, and nobody even knew that he was there. But that's one example of the stuff that he's doing, and people would let him know, like, my grandpa, we haven't heard from him. He lives in such and such place. And so he would drive his Jeep. Even if the roads were covered, they would go. They'd figure out how to get to these far-off places and bring medical attention and food to the people that needed it. So
wow. Again, individual instigators.
Yes. We saw so much of that.
Is this ongoing? I mean, is this still happening? I mean, as the need hopefully diminishes somewhat, but is this kind of an ongoing thing?
For me, for him?
Yeah, for all of you.
For all of us?
Keep track of how reconstruction is are
just very better? Lightly, and things are getting better, but as usual, it's like the tourist places are up and running because they really want the tourists to still come. But, as you leave those and maybe go to like little villages, there is still a lot of need.
Still the need.
Already there was such an economic crisis, and so then for this natural disaster to happen, it was like a 1-2 punch. Oh, I'm so sorry, I hit my microphone. Sorry, Joe.
So that leads to then the third trip, or the third part of the project, which is the trip with your children, where you take a donated fund and you come and you buy generators.
Yes. So by that point, Jamie and Morgan and all these people who had all kind of felt really passionate about Puerto Rico. There was a bunch of us, and I'm sorry that I'm not naming everyone's names, but we'll be here all day. There was a bunch of us who had decided, okay, this anonymous donor wants to donate all this money. What would be, we've seen it with our eyes, what do we think would be the biggest help? Is it water? Is it, what is it? And as we had been on the island, we saw that there was already people like really passionately taking care of the water situation. And so we thought, okay, so after that, we need to get people electricity. I was seeing pictures of kids doing their homework by flashlight.
And they're still doing their homework.
Oh,
they're trying to do
of
their
course, yes,
homework.
they're good
Yeah.
kids. But so just basic needs like refrigeration for your food and all these things, like you need electricity, and there was people that were going months and months and months without it. So we decided to just pool all that money and to buy as many generators as we could. And the store that we picked down there on the island, they were super sweet. They were like, well, not just generators, we're gonna throw in some water bottles, like big cases of water bottles and the oil that you needed for it and the gasoline, like everybody got a big tank full of gas so they could just jumpstart it and get things going at least.
Yeah. Miriam, I'm curious, you say you took your children, you were buying the generators, you were doing all this work, they were with you, and you brought this fabulous shot of your children on the mountainside. What was the impact on your children? That's got to be something.
I think it moved them on a lot of levels. First of all, they were really excited to be part of something bigger than themselves and to be watching as we're handing out the generator and the look on the families' faces. It was really moving. But then on like a family level also, I think that they all felt really proud to be Puerto Rican. After here we are, we're seeing all these resilient people and the yes we can spirit was so strong, and I just think it really moved them. And it was fun. It was fun to see them wanting to help others. Again, it's an opportunity I think every parent should give their child at some point.
Yeah.
It's really
It'll
great.
turn into a generational thing. With your mom and you and your kids.
And my mom was certainly raised that way too. I mean, my grandparents
Anne was raising
were very,
you that way. Yeah.
Right.
Right. So then you get back and you realize that there's even more. And you take trip number 3. And this time you take your women friends.
Yes. So that was one of those surprise things. I didn't expect to go back, but when we looked online and the tickets were really, really cheap, and I had friends that were so interested and that wanted to help. And so I said, well, what are you passionate about? Obviously, there's many different places of people in need. I'm going to continue giving things to my cousin, the priest, so he can pass them out to where it needs to go. And one of my friends, Ashley, she found out about the Sato project, and Sato means stray dog. So there already was a big stray dog kind of problem.
Population, yeah.
And then after the hurricane, it was one of those things where if people are in survival mode and you can't even hardly take care of your own family well at the time, then
The last thing you think about is your animals.
I mean, yeah, it's unfortunately, like I know that's hard for some people to hear, but that's just the reality of that situation. So we were able to go and we bought a bunch of donations for the animals and for the families that would be adopting the animals and for the organization themselves. And it was really awesome.
And one of the things that you said that you learned from that particular trip was the value of a group of people using social media. Can you talk about that? I mean, that's an angle we don't think about. We're always thinking about the individual contact, which I think is what we're longing for.
Yes.
But they used social media in a particular way.
Well, and it goes back to what you said about making people care about a place. I think just regular people like you and I showing that they're having a good time, that it's safe to be there, it's safe to drive, and that it's fun. And I had them I gave them the whole experience. I woke them up at 5 in the morning one time just to go watch the sunrise over the ocean, over El Morro, the big castle there. And it starts with that, and then with the food, I took them salsa dancing, we drank water right out of coconuts. And
so this is happening in the midst of all this.
Oh,
people are
absolutely.
still able to respond positively, to be welcoming, and to
Oh my gosh, that's all they know how to be, is very welcoming. We were there, the first time I went with Jamie and Morgan, the family that invited us to Thanksgiving dinner, they did not have electricity, they didn't have power at all, but they still made this huge meal for us, to make us feel comfortable. And even in this picture here when we went, this is in Lattice, and it's a mountain top, long drive to get up there. And when we get to the house that we're going to deliver this particular generator at, the roof there's a tarp, all you see, but as you went inside, the roof was just totally blown off. And still, they're going to bring us coffee. They're going to make us feel comfortable. Do you need anything? It's been such a long trip. Are you hungry?
So,
very welcoming.
The characteristics of survival, the resilience, and the ability to renew personally, even if they didn't have material things,
Totally.
is what you were impressed by and what you took
Oh,
away.
big time.
Yeah.
And like I said about driving, imagine there's no electricity. There are no traffic lights. So think about a 8-lane intersection. And so many of these little towns and little villages, there wasn't any government person standing there directing traffic. It was just regular people in street clothes that saw there was a need and that they got out of their car and they're like, okay, and they're directing traffic. Or everyone's just being very careful in other places. It was...
Well, it's just
you
what
do
you
what
did.
you have to do.
Yeah, it's what you did too.
Here's what one person can do when the need is there. And then one person inspires others and others and others.
Right.
I think I'm going to go back to the introduction and the whole idea of the ripple effect. I mean, you started the stone in the pool, but then you are also, you made the ripple continue. I mean, you really escalated it. Yeah.
That's how things got done,
Yeah.
really. In those days when there was bad communication and so many complications with FEMA, not coming through for certain people and paperwork issues and all these things. It was like it all comes down to neighbors looking out for neighbors, family looking out for each other, and you until you can get on your own feet and look after yourself. But
Yeah. I just am so impressed with that individual sort of initiative to move forward even though you didn't have a superstructure or an infrastructure or an institution around you, to just go ahead and then to see other people do that. That in itself is another way that you help, is just by taking your own, not that I want everybody to go out and be rogue, but to take in a positive way and in
I think there's a time to be rogue.
Yeah.
There is. And there's a time when maybe it's safer and better in an organization or more effective. But in this situation, I just knew what needed to get done, and so I just wanted to do it. And there was people that were helping it, and it all just kind of was falling into place. And I'm big on, like, if it's falling into place, go with it. Like
go with the strength. Yeah.
Exactly. And it just...
And what you have often celebrated, and we've talked about often, is resilience in the Puerto Rican people, and also their capacity to give back. I think you were really, when you spoke of that, that was one of your themes about that. I am so impressed with all of this. I just think this is an amazing story, and I think that this is one of those things that's not just about you, but it's a consciousness-raising effort about Puerto Rico in general, and the whole discovery of this is part of our country, for heaven's sakes. Let's acknowledge that and get busy.
Yeah, and the whole dimension of how one person can make a difference by not only inspiring others, but empowering others.
Yes.
We can all learn from that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Fabulous.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be right back. This is Ideas Live, and we have just completed a fascinating conversation with Miriam Pico about her experiences in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Irma and Maria devastated the island. And our theme was this idea of what an individual instigator can do. I was just fascinated at how it started with that small, intimate connection and then expanded from that familial to this amazing project, a movement. Yeah. What was your reaction?
Well, just kind of, she comes to this project with some advantages of having already a public presence of sort and many, many connections. But I think it struck me that what was most impressive was just her fearlessness, you know, not taking no for an answer.
Exactly.
We can do this, this kind of can-do that creates its own momentum and its own set of connections. And it's inspiring, I feel, and empowering to think what an individual can do with just that sense of mission.
I think the things that I kind of took away were she had the personal connection to begin with. So there was that initial motivation, of course. But then to identify and use all of her resources and to allow for that volunteerism to be chaotic and also to be to take advantage of all the other resources that came with the new people involved in the project.
To keep reinventing how they do it. Oh, this didn't work so well. Well, how about this?
Right.
Oh, well, let's try this. And I guess we're going to have to do it this way.
Yeah.
It's just,
and then the interaction and affirmation, I think, that we all needed about Puerto Rico being a part of this country.
yeah.
And being resilient and strong in a way that we don't always perceive. I think we sort of think lost cause maybe, but it's not. And she is such an affirmation of that strength and the initiative among those people as well.
And here she was, an immigrant who came to our...
Right. Except she was not an immigrant. No.
Okay,
no.
she came, yeah, it's a good point. You're
yeah,
not an immigrant.
she's a
You're a
citizen.
citizen who relocated, I should say.
Right,
That.
right.
But her passion for that, for her origins, I guess, is
Yes.
just palpable.
Yes.
And it kind of kindles that interest in me as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important part about it, that we are all part of the same pond. So let's appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for this month's work.